Hi, and welcome to another session of Searching for Answers, the program in which we dig into the text, read it slowly and carefully, thoughtfully and prayerfully. We invite you to join us. Grab your Bibles. We're in the book of Esther. So get whatever translation or version works for you while we introduce our panel here, and we'll get into the life and hard times of Queen Esther. Yeah. Joining us together this evening in the panel are Dr. Bernard Taylor, most recently of the pastoral staff of Loma Linda University Church, Dr. Leo Ranzelin, professor of New Testament Studies in the Faculty of Religion at Loma Linda University and associate dean of the faculty of Religion there. And also Dr. Laura Garrigues. Professor Garrigues is the chair of the English department with focus in literature. And I'm John Jones at La Sierra in the Divinity School. We're having an interesting time with this threesome, aren't we? King Ahasuerus and Haman, or Haman, however we want to pronounce his name, Esther, and just off the scene, Mordecai. So we'll get into this. Bernard, back up a little bit with us here in chapter 6, if you will. Take us through whatever the last few verses are to set the stage, whatever you choose, and then we'll pick it up from there.
Yes. So the chapter 6, and it's hard to break into this story. There is so much that is going on, but the king's not able to sleep, and he calls for records, finds out that in the record, Mordecai had saved his life, and when he inquired if anything had been done, nothing had been done. And so the king asked if anyone was available, and Haman had just come in, and so he is summoned in before Ahasuerus. And the king has a simple question: what shall be done for the man whom the king wishes to honor? And of course, Haman is sure that has to be Haman himself. And but it turns out that's not the case, but he goes ahead as if he is the one, and he asks for all his dream things, that he gets to wear a robe the king has worn, and wear this and that, and ride on the horse that has a crown on it, and somebody goes before him proclaiming the great majesty that he has just temporarily borrowed and how great he is. And then he discovers that it is Mordecai who is to be honored, his bitter enemy, and that Haman is to lead him in this. So his fortunes have overnight taken a turn for the worse. And so all of this is quickly done, and then he is now to go in before the king and the queen, before Esther with the king. And so there are the three of them, as you have mentioned.
Yeah, but now the plot is about to thicken even a little more, isn't it? So pick up with verse 12, if you would, Bernard, and carry us forward a little bit into the next twist and turn of the story here.
Okay, that's chapter 6 and verse 12.
In the book of Esther.
Then Mordecai returned to the king's gate, but Haman hurried to his house, mourning and with his head covered. When Haman told his wife Zeresh and all his friends everything that had happened to him, his advisors and his wife Zeresh said to him, "If Mordecai, before whom your downfall has begun, is of the Jewish people, you will not prevail against him, but will surely fall before him."
Look out for those Jews. Huh?
Yes.
Isn't that interesting?
It is.
They had a reputation already, didn't they, apparently? Yeah.
Yes. That introduces a whole different element, and alerts us as readers that this is already well known. So anything that Haman is inclined to do is against the the general knowledge that Jews are not to be messed with.
Is it possible that there is also a general resentment against them as well?
Oh, no, not possible at all. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Which is the only way that this royal decree really has any liability to it, and any viability to it, I should say, because there are people out there who apparently only need this opportunity. Yeah.
What could get worse for Haman than what he's just had to do for Mordecai?
Yeah.
Well, a lot.
Apparently, yeah.
Yeah.
Also, the fact that Zeresh and the friends have this knowing attitude about the Jews and the idea that they are powerful, I think this kind of reflects back on the fact that the story is being told over time. And I think through the voice of Zeresh, we have an almost narrator's wink at the audience. Like, you know, we know who this story is being listened to. We know ultimately this is about the Jewish people. And so I think that's kind of a nod to the layers of meaning and understanding and history that this story really reflects.
Yeah. So if it's told even hundreds of years later among the Jews, there's still that, yeah, and it isn't there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. So now, Leo, do you want to jump in on this, either with observations or picking up with the next few verses?
Just an observation or two before we read the text. Interesting here on how in chapter 5, from verses 9 and following, Haman recounts he speaks of the splendor of his riches, and the number of his sons, all the promotions with which the king had honored him and had advanced him above the officials and ministers of the king. Clearly we have someone who's quite proud and full of himself and loves and covets honor. And the next chapter, as Dr. Taylor just read, just begins to undo all that. And so, if you will, the great reversal has begun here that we're going to see come to fruition in another chapter.
Yeah, he's already gone home with a cloth over his head, it appears. Right. And that is about to be echoed in coming verses in a way, isn't it? Yeah. Yeah, so to carry us forward on this.
Okay, shall I read 6:14 through, how about 7:6?
Yeah. Take us, I don't know, down through verse 6 or so in chapter 7.
So after Zeresh tells Haman what's going to transpire to him if he's dealing with the Jewish people, verse 14, while they were still talking with him, the king's eunuchs arrived and hurried Haman off to the banquet that Esther had prepared. And so the king and Haman went in to feast with Queen Esther. On the second day, as they were drinking wine, the king again said to Esther, "What is your petition, Queen Esther? It shall be granted you. And what is your request? Even to the half of my kingdom it shall be fulfilled." Then Queen Esther answered, "If I have won your favor, O king, and if it pleases the king, let my life be given me. That is my petition, and the lives of my people. That is my request. For we have been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated. If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, I would have held my peace. But no enemy can compensate for this damage to the king." Then King Ahasuerus said to Queen Esther, "Who is he and where is he who has presumed to do this?" Esther said, "A foe and enemy, the wicked Haman." Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen.
Whoa. You've brought a picture of this moment, haven't you? Laura, you want to share that with us at this point?
Absolutely. So we have several different versions of this moment that artists have portrayed over time. This particular one was produced by a student of Rembrandt's, and here we see the trio that you mentioned. And we see Esther in the middle with her hand gesturing her accusation. she's pointing to the enemy. She is answering the king's question, who is he and where is he? And it's interesting how the artist has used lighting and color here. Though Esther is between the two men, you have the sense that she is closer to the king, and that puts Haman on the outside of the circle. It's part of that continuation of his fall. And while the tablecloth is light colored and her dress is gold and light color, you see Haman's dark robes kind of blending in with the dark background.
Yeah.
I think we see his fate in that sense. There's no doubt about who's going to come out on top in this conflict.
It's interesting that Haman has one feature that he is making available. He has a ring on the finger of his right hand, and that just happens to be on top. And we can only see one hand of the king, but the left hand, but there is no ring on there, and Haman is wearing the king's ring.
Very interesting.
But what struck me is this is a banquet, and the artist, I presume, intended to portray a banquet, which obviously bears no relationship to what we mean when we say the word banquet. You know, there are some bones left there from the meal, but they've eaten everything that is there. There's not an enormous amount left over like we would feel would have to do, otherwise it would seem like there wasn't enough to eat. It's interesting how it's been slotted into its time.
Right, sort of.
The text says, this Haman. And that implies a gesture, doesn't it? That's the most a verbal text can do to really give us what the paintbrush and artists have given us here. It's either this gesture, as you've called our attention to, Laura, or a point, or something. This despicable Haman.
This wicked Haman.
Yeah, right. Yeah, this wicked Haman. Yeah, right.
But the story is so well told.
Yeah.
You know, if we've read the story, we know, but as the story is unfolding, nobody anticipates it will go, even if it may go in that direction, that it will go to that depth in that direction. And, you know, it says it so well that he was terrified. Then Haman was terrified before the king and the queen. I mean, that's, whoa.
One thing that I'm struck with is how wise, astute, and discerning Esther is.
Yes.
Because when we set the stage here, we got to recall that in chapter 5, when she entered into the king's presence, you know, the scepter was extended, and there was the king's first request. I mean, first response to her. What is your request? What is your petition? And she said, as we know, come to my home this evening, let's have a banquet. And at that banquet, she asked for another banquet the next day. So this is, in essence, the second banquet. And I'm just so struck by her courage in particular, because she's still in a very precarious and dangerous situation. Haman is second in command, the prime minister, if you will. And the edict still stands against the Jews. And yet she is apparently calm, willing to wait even another day before she finally makes this request to the king.
Yeah.
It's remarkable courage and discernment to know just the right moment. And I think this is it.
That's right. I think the storytelling here is very conscious of the building up of the tension.
Right.
And it's because, as you've said, Esther knows her king and knows his personality, and she knows that it's creating tension and interest for him to sort of draw this out. And what you've noted in the multiple requests for her petition and her multiple postponements, we can also see in this actual speech itself. Even the speech itself kind of defers till the end, the actual request. So it's very literary in that sense. There's a sense of a rhetorical device that she's using. It's all very much crafted.
Not only, sorry.
And the king seems to be just in the right mood. The third time, perhaps in her quarters, he's drunk some wine. And perhaps even on his part, having gone now to a second banquet, a sense of obligation to respond in an affirmative way to Esther. So to me, it seems to me she has laid the groundwork to be in the best possible position to get a positive response from the king.
Right.
Yeah.
Not only defers, she is deferential. Verse 3, the queen answered, if I have won your favor, and if it pleases the king, the Hebrew has both, so you've just said it, and I accept, but do you realize what you have agreed to? And my request is on the basis of what you have said, with a reminder that you said it. And so it's an interesting, she doesn't just step right into it. She in effect accepts what's been offered and throws it back by the interrogative and the conditional nature of it with the if.
Yeah. Yeah, that is interesting, isn't it? And it's a kind of this is kind of a two-step thing, a request and a petition.
Yes.
And the request has to do with whether I have found favor, but beyond that, a petition for turns out to be my people, which is complete news, apparently, at some point in this story, to the king. Now, we see how adept she is, as all three of us have remarked, all three of you have remarked here. But again, notice, we're not sure in chapter 7 how to translate verse 4, the last phrase. It's a little bit problematic in the Hebrew. But it looks something like, in effect, she's saying, well, first of all, the king doesn't care how many thousand people get. He doesn't care. Let's grant that. He's an Oriental potentate, you know, unless it touches him. Yeah. But she hints that he would suffer some loss if indeed a major chunk of this particular group of people get wiped out. Apparently they are sufficiently productive in the economy or something. And she says nobody could actually pay you enough to make up the difference of what the loss would be to you. And you could make the statement that way. You could just say it like that. But she sticks the word enemy in there. Now notice what comes next. When she has to answer his question, in verse 6 she says, an enemy, this wicked Haman, this wicked Haman. So already there's another layer on which she has prepared the ground for this revelation, isn't it? In effect, she's saying, not only is Haman wicked, and he's your enemy, so you owe him nothing, but more to the point, you're going to lose something more than anyone could recompense you for in the lives of the potential portion of this population that could get wiped out in this thing. You see? Isn't that interesting? Yeah, only a literary text can pack it so densely. Isn't that right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
No,
It's interesting that in verse 4, reading it the 21st century, she sounds so up to date. For we've been sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be killed, and to be annihilated.
Yeah.
If we had been sold merely as slaves, men and women, equality, I don't think that's what she has in mind. But reading in a different time can seem to lead it in that direction.
Yeah. Yeah.
This is in 7:4, this is perhaps the second allusion to the fact, well, that the king indeed has accepted the bribe of 10,000 talents. 4:7 and now here in 7:4.
Yeah.
So like that, I'm convinced that indeed is what has transpired.
No, absolutely. It's interesting that her plea is not based on the value of these human beings, sort of in and of themselves. It really is an economic argument. It's how would the king be harmed from it? So she, again, she knows her king and how his mind works, and she's not even really able to call to the better angels of his nature. She's really appealing to his self-centeredness.
Yeah, and
It's
his
a very
economic
personal appeal and quest. And later on, as we're going to see in the next chapter, her argument actually is not an ethical one, you know, on the
but not
morality of this edict and how inappropriate it was. It's a very personal one, as you noted.
Right.
That seems to be an argument that's going to really get at her king. She knows her king.
Right.
personal and economic. Personal and economic terms. Yeah.
Right. I was going to add that even the king is given a nice rhetorical flourish in his reference. And I noticed, I'm looking at the New King James Version, and your version kept that King James Version cadence of who is he and where is he. There's the parallelism there, the repetition of it does have a magisterial kind of quality to it that, yeah, the king has a good line now and again as well.
And Haman was terrified.
Yeah.
Right.
He had no idea.
Yeah, right.
And that just shows you how, again, astute Esther was. And I actually think borderline reckless to bring the arch enemy, right? The prime minister, second in command, to the banquet, and to do this in this very dramatic way.
Not to whisper this in the king's ear separately.
Privately, right.
She wanted him there.
In bed in the middle of the night or something, you know. Yeah.
Right.
So, Laura, what do you think? Shall we carry this forward a little now?
Sure.
Maybe through 7 or so?
Okay, so
Chapter
I'll
7?
finish the chapter, okay?
Yeah.
Then the king arose in his wrath from the banquet of wine and went into the palace garden. But Haman stood before Queen Esther, pleading for his life, for he saw that evil was determined against him by the king. When the king returned from the palace garden to the palace of the banquet of wine, Haman had fallen across the couch where Esther was. Then the king said, "Will he also assault the queen while I am in the house?" As the word left the king's mouth, they covered Haman's face. Now Harbona, one of the eunuchs, said to the king, "Look, the gallows 50 cubits high, which Haman made for Mordecai, who spoke good on the king's behalf, is standing at the house of Haman." Then the king said, "Hang him on it." So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then the king's wrath subsided.
Ouch.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got several moments here. We've got the moment of revelation, which we've just talked about. We've got Haman apparently standing before Esther and then resorting to kneeling and prostrating himself, which then just triggers the king's and cements the king's determination, right? When he comes back in and greets this scene. So at that point, the trap has been completely sprung.
It's almost excessive, you could say, this little extra part of the scene, because Haman was already in trouble before the king left. But this idea that the king walks back in and sees Haman seemingly assaulting the queen, he did it to himself. He just added on top of it.
The thing I'm struck with here is a number of things. First is how duplicitous Haman has been. And now he has duped the king, right? He got the king to enact that edict against the Jews, and now the king realizes, whoa, what he had actually said earlier really was not true. And so the king realizes, I think he's been played. The other thing that I'm struck with, and in reading through some of the commentaries and scholarship, a lot of folks are deeply bothered by the ethics of this section you just read, because there's not a hint of kindness nor forgiveness on the part of Esther. She allows Haman to reap the whirlwind and the consequences of his action. So how might we respond to that lack of kindness and forgiveness on Esther's part? She, in some sense, takes no prisoners, right? Is this just the world in which he lived, the ancient Near East?
Yeah, I think that's the answer.
To allow Haman to have lived would have been foolhardy, unwise, And perhaps this dips back into 1 Samuel 15, right? When Saul allows the king of the Amalekites to live and how that badly played out for him. Could some of that be here in the text as well?
Well, and Haman's an Agagite.
Right. So for Esther to allow Haman to live would play out badly for her, maybe Israel.
And this is our only real glimpse into diaspora Judaism. So these people are a minority. They were ready to be wiped out. Is everything that they did to be assumed to have been ethically, to be ethical? We easily hold them to a different standard, and who knows but that you are called to the kingdom for such a time as this.
So you've got a kind of, I mean, it's a passive voice. Thou art called. You are called. No subject named. But you still got a pointer to divine providence in a way. Now, if you've got divine providence with you, you don't mess around. It does add stiffening to the spine, I guess we would say, wouldn't we?
Right. Well, there's a sort of math equation, I think, going on in Esther's mind. It's Haman and his household for all of her people. The idea of keeping Haman himself alive or his sons, who might cause revenge on her and their people, it's kind of a tidy mathematical problem that I think it seems with no hesitation she has come to grips with.
So we can see on the part of Esther that it was a reluctance to act in the beginning, by no means an inability to act. It was just a matter of gaining her commitment, and then after that, everything just flows. She understands the situation. We have no narrator telling us that Mordecai prepped her. She has stood on her own once she took the responsibility and went forward, and she had to deal with whatever might happen. She got the nod, as it were, the scepter was extended, but from then on she has taken her own course.
So maybe we've got a certain literary type here in which we have stories of Jewish people in foreign lands. And in the case of Joseph, he makes good. He reaches the upper echelons. He becomes prime minister, number 2, in Egypt. And that is through a pathway of misapprehension, of sexual misbehavior, which gets in his way. Here, the misapprehension actually helps Esther's case, so that knife can cut either direction. We'll have to resume this story now in our next session as we see how it plays out, as we continue looking at Esther, Mordecai, and friends on Searching for Answers.